Welcome to Parshat Noach, a parsha with so much action, it's easy to miss the plot.
Don't worry, we're here to help you out.
Really quickly, here's our 20-second parsha recap. God tells Noah that he's going to destroy the world and that he should take the animals and build an ark. Noah builds the ark, survives the flood, and God makes a rainbow. Noah plants a vineyard, and something shady happens with one of his sons. Then they all have kids, and some people decide to build a tower. God doesn't like the tower and scatters them.
And the question is, are these just standalone episodes mishmashed together, or is there a bigger picture here that connects all the stories in our parsha?
We think they are connected. Better yet, we think that beneath the surface of the flood, the vineyard, and the tower is a grand narrative that ties Parshat Bereshit to Noach and sets up the plot for the entire rest of the Torah. I'm David Block.
And I'm Emu Shalev.
And welcome to the Parsha Experiment. Instead of picking one or two episodes out of the Parsha to focus on each week, we try to uncover the grand story that all those episodes tell together.
If this is your first look at this series and you want to learn a bit more about what we're trying to do here at the Parsha Experiment, go ahead and listen to our introduction in the beginning of last week's video.
And the whole video while you're at it. It was pretty good.
One of the most puzzling things in our Parsha happens right after the flood. When Noah comes out of the ark, God says something fascinating. V'hakimosi esprisi itchem v'lo yikares kol basar od mimei hamabul. I'm going to establish a covenant with you, and there will never again be a flood to destroy the earth.
And the question is, what's going on here? God obviously thought that it was perfectly appropriate to destroy the world the first time. So what changed? Is God just having second thoughts? Like, oh shoot, wait, I did not think this through. I probably shouldn't have done that. I mean, if it was okay to destroy the world once, why not destroy it again if mankind becomes just as deserving?
Right. It was either the wrong thing to do, God realizes and promises never to do it again, or it was the right thing to do, but for some reason, now it isn't. What was God's agenda here?
We think that there's a clue in the verses of the flood's aftermath, in a fascinating theory proposed by Rabbi Foreman. As we read, think about where in the Torah have we heard these words before? Here's a hint. This is the second parsha in the Torah, so the options are pretty slim. Psst. Last week.
Okay, so right after the flood, the verse says, Vayaver Elohim ruach ala haaretz, vayashoku hamayim. A wind of God passed over the land, and the water subsided. So that's our first hint. Does that remind you of anything?
Then, vayisachru mayanot tehom, va'arubot hashamayim, vayikaleh hageshem min hashamayim. The springs of the deep, meaning the waters below, and the floodgates of heaven, the waters from above, were sealed, and the rain ceased. So the waters of the flood really came from two directions. The waters below and above came together, and now they would separate.
Then, vayashuvu hamayim me'al haaretz haloch vashov, the waters receded from the earth, which revealed the land underneath.
Okay, so what does all of this remind you of? Where else have we heard about a wind of God hovering on water? Waters below and waters above separating, waters receding to reveal dry land.
It sounds eerily reminiscent of creation itself. The second verse in the Torah describes what the world was like before creation. Ve'aretz hayta tohu vavohu ve'choshech al pnei tehom ve'ruach Elohim mirachefes al pnei hamayim. The earth was without form and empty, with darkness on the face of the depths, and the wind of God hovered on the water's surface. And now look back at what happened after the flood. Vayaver Elohim ruach al haaretz vayashoku hamayim. A wind of God passed over the earth, and the water subsided. In both cases, we have this wind of God hovering over the waters of the world.
Continuing in creation, on the second day, Vayas Elokim es harakia, vayavdel ben hamayim asher mitachas harakia, uben hamayim asher me'al harakia. God made a sky by separating the waters underneath and on top. And that's exactly what we saw with the flood. The waters came from below and from above. And when the flood was over, those two sources were held back and separated, once more allowing the sky to reappear.
Pretty cool. And it continues on day 3 of creation. Vayomer Elohim, hikavu hamayim mitachas hashamayim el makom echad, v'seira'eh hayabasha. God said, gather the waters under the heavens to one place to reveal dry land. And look again at the flood. The waters receded to reveal the dry land underneath.
So the aftermath of the flood really does seem to be patterned after creation. But just in case you think this may all be just a coincidence, let's see, do these patterns continue? In addition to the water revealing dry land, something else happened on day 3 of creation too. Vegetation and plant life were created. The eitz osepri asher zarovo, and fruit-bearing trees sprouted. And we actually have something like that in the post-flood story too. The dove brings back the olive branch, signaling to Noah that plant life had re-emerged. There are now fruit-bearing trees again.
On the 4th day of creation, God created the sun, moon, and stars. The verse says, to establish night, day, and the seasons of the year. And in our story, after Noah makes landfall and offers sacrifices to God, God promises he won't destroy the world again, but he also says something else.
Od kol yimei haaretz, zera v'katzir, v'kor v'chom, v'kayetz v'choref, v'yom v'layla, lo yishbosu. And what do you know? God tells Noah that all the days of the earth, the seasons, and day and night shall not cease. The day, night, and the seasons were the exact function of the sun, moon, and stars, as described on the 4th day, and they make their appearance in our story right on cue.
These parallels actually keep on going, and Rabbi Foreman explores them all in some of the courses that we've linked below. But the question is, why are these parallels here, and what in the world are they telling us?
So here's Rabbi Foreman's theory. What is the simplest way to explain these patterns? God created the world once in Genesis, and now, with the flood, it sounds like God's creating it again. The flood is a story of destruction, but also of recreation. There are really 2 worlds. There's the pre-flood world, and now a brand new post-flood world.
By placing these parallels in the text, the author, God, is revealing the deeper significance of the flood story. The flood isn't just the tool God uses to wipe out a few sinners. It's not the latest punishment since the ones handed out to Cain and to Adam. The flood is nothing short of the rebirth of the entire world.
This is a continuation of the story that we started to tell last week. God created this ideal world in which mankind could have this really close relationship with him. But again and again, mankind sinned by ignoring God and by making their own rules, their own decisions as to what's good and what's evil.
And when humanity spiraled out of control, God isn't angry, he's sad. Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'aretz, vayinachem Hashem ki asa es ha'adam ba'aretz, vayit'atzev el libo. And God saw that the evil of man was great in the land, and God regretted making man and became sad in his heart. God seems to realize that his plan to build a world for humanity and to have a relationship with them, it's not working, and he decides to start over. Time for plan B.
But the million-dollar question is, how does God know that the problems from the pre-flood world aren't just going to resurface again? That mankind won't continue to sin and ignore God?
So here's the key. God recreates the world a little bit differently than he did the first time. The reason why it won't be destroyed again is not because mankind won't ever sin. It's because it's a different world that operates with different rules.
Here are a couple of ways that the world changes. Number 1, God won't destroy the world. In the pre-flood world, evil was met with destruction. In the post-flood world, not so much. And number 2, God won't curse the land. If you remember from last week, Adam and Cain's sins corrupted their relationship with the land. But now, the land will continue to produce like it always has. This new world is much less sensitive to the evil of mankind.
It seems that God designs this new world in response to humanity's shortcomings. And while mankind's evil might have seemed like a good reason for God to call it quits on humanity, he doesn't. God seems like he's still interested in holding on to that relationship. And paradoxically, instead of holding on tighter, he lets go.
At the very least, it seems like people have more leeway now. Like they can sin and God won't choose to destroy them like he once did. And that kind of sounds nice.
But from the other perspective, it's terribly sad. All relationships have expectations. If one partner betrays the other, the consequences can devastate the relationship. But in some relationships, like that of a parent and child, sometimes unconditional love is what's needed. A child might rebel or do hurtful things, and the parents bear the pain and continue to show love in the hopes that their child might one day return.
Before the flood, God and man were in a deeply committed relationship. The stakes were high enough that a betrayal was met with consequences.
In the post-flood world that God recreates, fewer punishments are handed out, but humanity and God are also not as close as they used to be.
Sometimes a parent needs to let go and give their children the time and space they need to make it back on their own. And that's what God seems to be doing here.
So, does this new plan work? Does the recreated world bring humanity back to God?
Unfortunately, things seem to get worse before they can get better. And that seems to be what the rest of the Parsha is about. In the stories of Noah and the vineyard and the Tower of Babel, mankind seems to sin in the new world in pretty similar ways to how they sinned before the flood.
Sadly, we don't have time to fully explore the vineyard story, but the good news is that we have another course on Aleph Beta devoted to just that, linked below. And then, a few generations later, we arrive at the final big episode of the Parsha, the Tower of Babel.
Here's the thing. Many of us may have learned that the tower builders were these really evil people who wanted to build a tower that would reach all the way up to heaven so that they could wage war with God. But the text itself says nothing about that at all.
So what was the big deal with these guys?
Here's what happened. Humanity seemed to band together, and they say two things. First, Hava nilvana levenim, let's make bricks. Then, Hava nivna lanu ir, umigdal v'rosho v'shamayim. Let's make a city with a tower up to the heavens. Actually seems pretty harmless.
The truth is, God himself seems to admit that they did nothing wrong. Yet. Vayomer Hashem, hein am echad v'safa achas lechulam, v'zeh hachilam la'asos? V'ata lo yibatzer mehem kol asher yazmu la'asos. These are one people of one language, and this they've begun to do? Now they'll be able to do anything they want. So I'm going to prevent them from going any further. It seems that God saw a potential danger in what they were doing. But what was that danger?
It's easy to miss if you don't look carefully. Their first plan wasn't even to build a tower. Let's take another look at the verse right before that. Hava nilbana levenim, v'nisrfa l'sreifa, v'tahi lahem halvena la'aven. Let's make bricks, and we'll burn them, and the bricks were to them as stone.
Why do we care about their building materials? They all got together and decided to make bricks. Great. Do we have to hear about the building permits that they got and who supplied the doorknobs too?
But look closely. The Torah is telling us about the newest technology of the day, the brick. And what was the brick? The verse says, "V'tahi lahem halvena la'aven." The bricks that they had just made, they were like stones. Up until that point, if you wanted to build a house, you did it with stone, materials that the earth freely gave for the benefit of humanity.
But the people decided to play creator and make their own versions of stones, the brick. That which the earth gave them, which God gave them, wasn't good enough for them anymore.
And when they invented the brick, they decided to build a city with a tower to reach the heavens. But for what purpose?
The verse actually tells us we want to build a tower, v'na'aseh lanu shem, in order to make a name for ourselves.
So here's a theory. There's nothing wrong with new technology. There's nothing wrong with wanting to create bricks. God made us in his image and gave us the ability to create, biologically and technologically. But as soon as they said, in order to make a name for ourselves, God looked at that and said, uh-oh, I see where this is going. God was watching humanity revert to their pre-flood mistakes.
Yeah, and that's a bad direction to head in. But just like with Adam and Eve, the privileges of this world, like the ability to create, are meant to be enjoyed in the context of a relationship with God. That's why they could eat from all the trees, save the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
So when God saw that humanity started to make bricks, essentially to improve upon God's bricks, God waited to see what they'd do with their new technology. Would they use the brick for good within their relationship with God?
And God found the answer in the next line. They wanted to build a tower not for God, but for their own legacy. Na'aseh lanu shem. Let's make a name for ourselves. God looked at it and said, No. I've seen this episode already. I've seen mankind forget about me and think only about themselves. I've seen them act as the sole creator before and make their own decision about what's good and what's evil.
So before it was too late, God intervened. He made sure that the new world wouldn't make the same mistakes as the pre-flood world.
This time, he didn't destroy the world, but he also didn't let humanity spiral out of control.
Right, and I don't know about you guys, but these last two parshas are really difficult. It's kind of like watching a horror movie when you yell at the screen, "Don't go in there!" It's incredibly frustrating to see mankind fail again and again. Plan A, God's original world, that didn't work. Plan B, letting go of humanity, that also seems to fail.
It's time to unravel Plan C. If humanity is ever going to make its way back and have a relationship with God, they're going to need help. And soon.
Enter Abraham.
Of the 50 chapters of the book of Genesis, 40 of them talk about Abraham and his family. The only parts that don't are the 10 chapters of Parshat Bereshit and Noach.
If the subject of this book is the family of Abraham, that means we've just concluded the prologue to our story. And we're left with a failed humanity, a broken relationship, and a loving God who's left to pick up the pieces.
But Abraham is going to change everything. Somehow, he's going to be the antidote to the problem of humanity. He'll lead them back to the close and intimate relationship with God.
Join us next week and let's explore together the character of Abraham and how he and his family are meant to save humanity. Hey everyone, these Parsha videos are only the beginning of the story. For more evidence and to take a look at some of the stories that we didn't get a chance to cover, check out some of the other videos on our site, linked below. And if you have any thoughts about the significance of these stories or how they connect together, we'd love to hear them. Please share your thoughts below.